We flew out of Saigon at sunset and the trip was extremely pleasant. The smell of fried rice and fish cooking while nice cool air flowed through the helicopter. A dreamy night. We landed at Kuchi in our helicopter sandbagged area. I had to run to the outhouse to sit on the pot. We all peed on the ground or in a barrel set in the ground at various places. One always had to bring their C-ration toilet paper or their last letter from the girlfriend or family for toilet paper. Paper was very scarce. I was done and was walking away from the outhouse when a rocket hit dead on the outhouse that I just left. I hit the ground for the rest of the rockets and probably mortars. Jeez. One could go wacky and think they were after you individually on purpose, but I knew better than that. The rockets and mortars were the random explosions that killed and tore apart many an unlucky guy, no matter where they may be in base camp. No one was completely safe, although the levels of safety were evident. Next day we were up well before daylight checking on the helicopter, putting on the machine guns and getting ammo and C-rations for the day. Our flight of 10 helicopters picked up the infantry fellows, 6 to a helicopter as usual, and headed out to what was always a bad area, heavily infested with well-armed NVAVC characters. The enemy was respected by I and many others. They were good, brave fighters. Even though we did our best to kill each other and both sides were quite proficient in this pursuit, we respected each other as soldiers. They were good at what they did, and one had to be very observant during every moment of battle. Anything could happen, and usually did. We flew a long way and were to get tricky with this LZ. Tricky I never liked, not out in heavily defined enemy territory. They had tricky covered. We had an artillery strike going on where we supposedly would land near a canal lined with trees. To me, the artillery strikes lasted too long and just warned the NVAVC where we intended to land. Since the enemy owned the countryside and were always in close proximity of where we were going land, they had ample time in the usual artillery preparation of 30 minutes to congregate in the LZ area before we got there or later. It was like boom, boom, here they come. Set up the mortars, the 51 calibers, and the RPGs, not to mention hundreds of NVAVC converging on the battle area. Many times the helicopter air crews and the infantry fellows preparing to land were doomed before we even got to the LZ. And before even the artillery strike, there was a Huey command and control helicopter circling the area that we intended to land in. Duh, guess what that meant? So, in many circumstances, the enemy realistically had about an hour to prepare themselves for our reception. Anyway, we were going to trick the enemy this time by not landing exactly where the artillery was hitting, but by diving to low elevation. We pretended we were going to land there. Instead, we kept flying treetop level to about 2 miles further up the canal, and then we landed along the canal line. Along most canal lines in our area, there was about a 4-foot embankment along both sides of the canal, probably to keep the water in the canal in high rains, so as not to flood the surrounding areas. Along the banks of the canal, there was always lush vegetation such as nipa palm, banana, and other vegetation. One in peacetime could water their crops with the canal water. In wartime, the canals were used at night to transport ammo, weapons, rice, and enemy personnel in sampans hidden along the banks of the canal. Since some canals were so close to Cambodia, one could depend on finding the NVAVC in great numbers. We made our low-level approach and landed along the humped-up and vegetated canal line. We landed about 30 feet from the vegetation, and all of a sudden I was looking at bunkers with firing slits in them that began firing at us. I returned fire directly into the slits as all 10 machine gunners did on the Hueys. They surprised us and we surprised them. The infantry jumped out as planned and were immediately taking casualties, dead and wounded. I think every helicopter took hits but managed to get out of the LZ. Some landed close to the area, unable to make it back anywhere of distance. The air crews on the disabled Hueys were picked up. But what about the poor infantry? It was always, what about the poor infantry fellows being shot up? There was help on its way, another 60 infantry fellows and artillery strikes, and maybe some jet fighter airstrikes from Tan Son Nhut Air Base near Saigon. But about half of the 60 guys we dropped off would not make it back to base in one piece or even alive. Like the fellow that was in Vietnam who was training us at the rifle range in basic training at Fort Leonard Wood said, "You don't want to be infantry in Vietnam." Another day for us like many others. All along we were taking casualties, but nothing like the infantry. The infantry fellows were expendable. It was war. I talked to a friend I made who was a new infantry private when he got to Cu Chi the same time I did. We were sort of students of tactics, one might say. He showed up one day when I was working on my helicopter. We had both spent about 3 months in Vietnam. He rode into battle many times in my helicopter. He was wounded once and had received a Bronze Star for valor and had Buck Sergeant stripes on. I congratulated him on still being alive and going up in rank so fast. He said, yeah, that he was the only one left in his platoon that wasn't dead or wounded enough to be sent home, so they made him sergeant, figuring he knew what he was doing if he survived as long as he did. Geez, we both had a good sense of humor but didn't drink alcohol and were very serious about our roles in the war. We had jobs to do, and it took all our brain power and physical dexterity to do our jobs and stay alive. The crew chiefs and gunners had good relationships with the infantry they worked with. After all, we were the only enlisted guys out in the boonies getting shot at and shooting back. The helicopter pilots were usually a bunch of drunks telling war stories together in the officers' club, boozing it up. The officers had their excuse that it was a dangerous job and they kept up their nerve by drinking. To me, most were a very sorry lot that could have done their jobs better if they were not half drunk or hung over in the early morning hours. In my opinion, the officer drunks were getting people killed by their incompetence. As soon as the flight landed, they ran into the mess hall to get food and then went to the officers' club and partied all night by drinking excessively. We crew chiefs and most gunners had another 3 hours to get the mechanical problems fixed and the machine guns cleaned and ammo ready. We never made it to the mess hall. We ate sea rations on the helicopter. We didn't have time to eat and did not want to. We were very tired, and we were at the helicopters ready to go way before any pilot showed up. I refused to let some pilots fly my helicopter because of their drunken habits, incompetence, and hot dog flying. By hot dog flying, I meant flying with skids hitting water and flying under bridges and between trees when it was not called for. Combat was dangerous enough without some drunk in control putting his aircrew and the infantry on board in extra jeopardy. I would tell non-alcoholic pilots I did not want so-and-so to fly on my helicopter. Word would get out and I had no problems with them showing up anymore on my helicopter. The pilot's drinking habits really bent me out of shape big time. My sergeant friend, I forgot his name after all these years, and that is a shame on me because he may have died out there somewhere. We were like of mind. We both believed we would not survive our year in Vietnam. He said to me that they were being put into bad areas and expected to do impossible things. He said he had to deal with new lieutenants who had no idea what was going on in Vietnam. Some jerk in Saigon wanted this 60-man patrol to land here and then go there not even considering the terrain or enemy because he never was in the area. Then the new lieutenant would think he had to do the impossible. The sergeant would then let the new lieutenant know that his orders were impossible to carry out. What to do, the lieutenant would ask. Just tell command the truth, that we couldn't even make 2 miles a day in that thicket, and if command thinks otherwise that he should come out here and join you. Of course, command would never do such a thing, but instead would moan about how inept his lieutenant or troops were. My sergeant friend and I agreed that there was a lack of honesty and intelligence in the top ranks that are getting their troops killed needlessly. Probably because of lack of intelligence, lack of bravery, lack of dignity, and lack of honor on their part. Seems making rank, getting phony medals, and their military careers were more important than their soldiers' lives. The enlisted and drafted infantry soldiers in Vietnam were the real heroes. They wanted to get home alive and in one piece. But high numbers of them were getting killed needlessly by very bad decisions by senior officers in the conduct of the war, all the way down to small patrols.